So today we're going to be taking a closer look at the new Slimline dies. There are 3 different sets. We have the large Slimline with sliders, the small Slimline with lift the flaps, and the Slimline stitched hillside borders. The large Slimline has 2 different size rectangles in this set. The largest is 3.5 by 8.5, which is the size of a Slimline card, and then the smaller one is 2.5 by 7.5. There are also 3 different slider styles in this set: a straight slider, a curved slider, and then one that is S-shaped that coordinates with the Slimline stitched hillside borders. The small Slimline with lift the flaps cuts a rectangle that is 8 inches by 3 inches, and it also has these fun flaps. They're all one die, so they're perfectly lined up all the time. And then there's these fun shapes that you can cut out from the flaps or just from any project. There's a star, a heart, and a scallop circle. They're outside in dies, so they cut a stitching detail on the shape, and they leave a stitching detail around the window as well. Here are the 3 rectangles that you get with those 2 different sets, and you can see how they are meant to layer together. So the 2 white rectangles are the ones that come in the large set, and then the kraft colored one is the one that comes in the small set, and they layer together to create a 1/4-inch mat between each one. The Slimline Stitch Hillside Borders has 4 different borders that you can cut. These can be anything that your imagination wants them to be. They can be the ground like they are here, cut from kraft. They can be green grass. They could be white. They could be snow. They could be water if you cut them from blue. The possibilities are endless. There are 2 basic shapes, a very simple S-curve and then a much more wavy hill, as you can see here. We have them going in both directions, so they're really fun to layer together. So you can see here the 2 wavy ones going in each direction, layered one behind the other. And here are the 2 more simple ones layered one behind the other. They just create a really fun dimensional scene. The first card I'm creating for today's video is a card inspired by Tammy. So I've gone ahead and I've cut this rectangle from some kraft cardstock, and I'm going to use one of the hillside borders to cut the hillside, and this is going to be sand. Then I'm going to take this mermaid rectangle that is cut in the same size as the one before, and I'm going to use one of the more hilly hillsides, and I'm going to layer that in the back. You can see that I've put the 2 together so I can see how high it's going to go, and this is going to be waves in the background. Now I'm going to add some distress ink to the edges of these pieces to give them a little more texture. So I'm just adding some peacock feathers ink to the blue piece, just on the edges. Then I'm going to go in and add some tea dye ink to the hillside that's going to go in the front. Like I said, this is going to be my sand because we're creating a beach scene today. And then to give it a little more texture, I'm actually going to splatter some paint on the sand. So I'm going to go in with a dark brown watercolor and just put some dark brown splatters. And then I'm actually going to go in with some white watercolor too. So these are nice pigmented watercolors, so this really gives it some sand texture. Now I'm going to work on the background, so I've cut that same size rectangle from some white cardstock, and then I'm going to use some distress oxides to create kind of a sunset colored sky. So I'm starting in the center with some wild honey. This is going to be where the sunshine is. And then I'm going to go in with some carved pumpkin and add some darker orange on the sides. I'm just going to go back and forth between these 2. Once I get that darker orange on there, you'll see I'm going to go back to the lighter one and just blend between the 2 colors so that it's all nice and seamless. Then I'm actually going to go in and add just a little bit of ripe persimmon, which is just a slightly darker orange, and just add that to the edges. You can see that I'm not putting any ink on the bottom because this water is going to go on the bottom, so I don't need to worry about inking the whole piece. So I'm using some liquid glue. I'm going to go ahead and layer the water and the waves. And then I'll just layer the sand right on top of that. And I've already put the glue on that sand piece. So I think this looks really cool how the water sort of dips behind the sand. Now I've cut a piece of white cardstock with that largest rectangle and I'm putting it onto the card base. You don't really have to do this, but I thought it was kind of nice to have that stitching detail, so it kind of gives it a little more finished look, but you could put this directly onto a card base. I've got a stitch circle cut from some sticky note cardstock. I actually forgot to stick this on before the wave, so I've cut the bottom off and I'm just going to tuck it behind. So I'm just centering that up and tucking that sunshine down behind my ocean waves. I've cut some palm trees from some cilantro and noble fir cardstock with some chocolate bar trunks, and I'm just using liquid glue to put those down as well. I'm going to tuck the bottoms behind the sand. So you're going to see on some of these I'll just trim them off so that they're a little shorter, and I just have to tuck them right behind the edge of that sand for them to look like they're coming up from behind it. So now I'm going to work on the sentiment here, and I thought it would be fun to put the sentiment on the sunshine, and I thought it would be really fun to kind of curve it around that curve. So I've actually got the die that I used to cut the circle. I've laid it on a block, and I'm using it as a guide to curve the sentiment. So I'm just lining up that sentiment right along the edge, inside edge of that die, and that's going to perfectly shape it to match the circle that is the sunshine behind this little car. So now that I've got that on the block the way I need it, I'm just going to ink that up and stamp that right along the edge of that sun. So I'm going to go ahead and mount this whole panel onto my card base, and I'm going to pop it up on some foam. So now I'm going to pop up the car on some foam squares as well. And then I'm just going to mount it right in the center with the sun, almost like they're driving off into the sunset. I really love how that sentiment sort of frames it up as well there in the center. And now this card is all finished. Next, I'm going to be making a card using the lift the flaps and the small rectangle. So I've cut that small rectangle from some kraft cardstock along with the flaps that go in the middle. So you can see that cuts the 3 flaps out perfectly. And I'm going to be doing some tone on tone stamping. So I'm using the Ahoy Matey set, and I've got some dough ink, and I'm just stamping some of the little images around. I'm basically making this look sort of like a treasure map in the background. I've already got my pieces colored and cut out, and I'm just using those as placement so I can fill in between them. And then once I have all my stamping done that I want to do, I'm going to go in with some tea dye, distress ink, and my blending brush. And I'm going to darken up and distress the edges of this and some of the middle. I just want this to look more varied in texture, to kind of look more like an old map. I've cut the large slimline rectangle from some pattern paper from the Really Rainbow Scallop collection, and I'm just going to put that onto a card base. Again, this card base is 3.5 by 8.5. It fits in a standard size envelope, so you don't have to worry about special envelopes for these. And then I'm going to add some liquid glue around my flaps, making sure not to put any where the flaps actually are. And then I'm going to center that up onto my card base. So now that I have my flap piece glued down, I can work on putting my sentiment in here. I'm putting it under the middle flap, and it says, "You're a treasure." I'm going to put the treasure chest on the front of that particular one. I've got 3 images that I'm going to center up in the middle of each flap, and I am adhering those down with some foam adhesive for some dimension. This would be fun to create a scene across all of the flaps and then parts of the scene open up to reveal other things behind them. But on this particular card, I'm keeping it simple with 1 image on each flap and then letting that treasure map background fill in the rest of the space. I put 1 pirate in each of the other flaps, and I'm just decorating around the sentiment with a couple other small images there. And of course, I'm putting these down with liquid glue so they're nice and flat since they're under the flaps. You don't want to use the foam adhesive for these parts because they need to be flat hidden underneath there. And then this card is all finished. I think it's super fun. It really fills it in to have those nice big flaps that you can flip up and reveal different things underneath. The last card I have to share today was inspired by Rebecca, and we're creating a slider card. So you can see how that slider slot lines right up with the same curve of the stitched hillside. And I'm just going to cut these from some cilantro cardstock that's cut with that rectangle die. I've also cut the same rectangle from some spiffy speckles paper for the background. And I'm going to go and put some foam tape on the back of this, and I'm making sure that my penny, or in my case I have a dime, will slide and not get hung up on any of that foam adhesive. So you can see that I have really thin pieces at the top, and I made sure that it doesn't get hung on anything. Then I'm going to go and put a foam square on that dime, and this is going to fit through the slot. So I'm going to flip it over and put it in the slot. And then I'm just going to test it some more and make sure that it moves. In my case, it kept wanting to turn a little bit. So what I did was I added a few more pieces of that foam square, making it more of a rectangle shape so it didn't turn. Now I'm going to take off the liner paper from the foam that I've put on the back. And actually what I did was I took my background piece and flipped it over and lined it up. I was afraid I would lose my dime if I tried to pick that up with the dime in there. So I just flipped it over, lined up the edges, so excuse my head there, and then when I flip it back, my dime is in the right place. This is where it kept turning, so I'm adding a few pieces of foam to it so that I have more of a rectangle and it'll slide in that slot and not try to turn. You might want it to turn depending on what you're putting on it, but I'm putting a fire truck on it, so it's probably not a good idea for it to flip over. So I'm going to go ahead and put my fire truck on my little slider here. And then this is actually where I realized that I forgot to put that green piece in the slot. So this might have been fine if I want a blue road, but I want this to match the green ground that I have. So actually, I just put a little bit of liquid glue on each side of the truck. I've put it in the center, and if you're very careful, you can slide this right under that dime. So that's what I'm doing. I'm sliding it under the dime, and I'm lining it up and gluing it down with that liquid glue that I put in the slot. So it was an easy fix, just something I forgot ahead of time. So now I'm going to stamp my sentiment that says thank you for all you do. And I'm stamping that kind of at the top of the hill because I'm going to have that fire station on the left side in the dip of the hill. And then I'm also going to stamp the ew, the siren sound. Now I can glue this whole thing to the card base. And I'm just using a liquid glue for this so that I can shift it around, make sure that it is centered. I've just taken a piece of pattern paper for my card base, and I picked some leftover red plaid that I had. This is actually Christmas paper, but it works great and ties in nicely with the red of the fire truck and the firehouse. So now I can continue to decorate my card with the other pieces. I've put some foam and some liquid glue on the back of the fire station so it can be popped up like the grass below it. And then I'm going to add some little clouds that are from the Village Hero set, as well as the little fire hydrant that's from that set. So I'm using some liquid glue to glue the large clouds down, and then I just use some foam for the small clouds just so that the sky has some dimension as well. And now this card is all finished, and how cute is that little fire truck that moves in the slider going from the firehouse out to the fire. Now for some cards by the design team. Here's Tammy's card that inspired my sunset card that I made in today's video. And here is a really fun Lift the Flap card by Grace. I love her inked background that she created, and then you open it up to another cool inked background with lots of aliens. It's super fun. Here's a card by Elise where she used the Car Critters cart and they look like they're at the drive-in, and I just think this is so cute. Here's a slider card by Kara, and I love that she white embossed her images and watercolored them for a real cool look. Here's another card by Grace where she filled the whole card using all the town pieces of the Village Heroes set. And then here's a fun Lift the Flap card by Jen, and I just love the dreamy look that she created, and she has a fun surprise under every flap. I really love Yainea's tall slimline card where she used the road border die, and she also used the scripty thank you border die to change up the look of the sentiment. Tammy created a fun village scene by piecing the road border together and extending the grass to fill in this fun slimline card. Megan has a vertical slimline card where she created a great stenciled background for her village heroes images. And then here's Rebecca's card that inspired my card today. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.